right. Um, Excited to get going. Welcome everyone who's managed to join. Um, we've got some pretty awesome guests today. Excited to chat. We usually run these webinars pretty informally. We have an agenda, we got some topics we'll hit, but really the fun part is once you get a bunch of people in a room who really know what they're doing around a certain topic. I really just can't wait to kind of see where it goes and what we end up talking about. So, first of all, let's go through some introductions and then we'll kind of get right into it. I think the time's going to fly by. So we've got Bianca Nieves, if you want to maybe give your introduction first, and then we'll go around the room.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bianca, currently heading up Demand Gen over at Humanly. We're a conversational AI recruiting engine for high-volume hiring teams. Just closed our Series A earlier this summer. It's been a blast. We're about 30 people, moving from a hybrid model into in person. But yeah, looking forward to this chat today.
Awesome. Matt, you want to go?
Hey everybody, Matt Early. I am currently fractional CMO for a number of startups, mostly kind of early stage in the B2C as well as a little bit of B2B world. Formerly, I was the head of growth at Drizzly in the alcohol delivery space, kind of back in the day. Was the head of growth at Havenly in the online interior design category, and then was the chief growth officer at a company called Stella that was in kind of a marketplace for PTSD trauma treatment. And so, yeah, I've just spent most of my career in the early stage startup and growth and marketing world. So yeah, excited to talk about some of that and how it kind of connects to the demand gen area.
Awesome. Ryan?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Narad. I lead marketing at Mutiny. We help marketers squeeze more out of their website through AI-powered personalization, conversion, and A/B testing. Prior to Mutiny, I spent the last decade in B2B marketing and started out in demand gen, both on the agency side at startups and at companies like Google. So excited to kind of share that perspective with you all today.
Awesome. And I'm Chris Toy, CEO, co-founder of Marketer Hire. I've been in marketing for about 20 years, agency side, brand side, worked with a lot of startups, ran my own agency, kind of worked every angle of the industry, and then co-founded Marketer Hire in 2019. And we are a pretty fast-growing talent marketplace. We're the lead in the marketing space, and excited to kind of get into this. I think it's actually kind of funny. I think maybe the first time. So Drizzly I use, Mutiny, Marketer Hire uses, and then Humanly, Bianca and I were talking that we probably should try it out. So this might be like a 3 for 3 in terms of me using the products that all the panelists work on, which is not always the case. Cool. So just kind of get started. I would love to, just address right away the topic. We come up with these topics, not necessarily because we agree with them or trying to force an opinion, but rather picking things that we think are, on trend and being thought of and discussed in our industry, and then wanting to just put some meat on the bones of kind of really what they mean. So, the new B2B marketing playbook, demand gen over lead gen, I can definitely feel that B2B marketing is going through a massive, I wouldn't say renaissance, but very different right now to 5 years ago, 3 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And I started in B2B. I started in direct mail and direct marketing B2B. Whether it's like influencer marketing or HubSpot acquiring media companies. There's just a lot of stuff happening now in B2B that was not even remotely on the radar, years ago, let alone even months ago. And then demand gen over lead gen. I think very sort of very common conversation happening at a lot of B2B marketing teams is around, hey, let's go into demand gen and kind of get ahead of things here instead of just hunting leads all the time. Like most things, there's nuance and there's balance to that, but we'd love to kind of just go around the room and hear what you guys kind of are thinking and feeling in your work these days when it comes to just a topic that we're here to discuss. Is there a new playbook, and does demand gen over lead gen sort of resonate with you? Maybe we start with Bianca.
Yeah, sure thing. I think it's an interesting question. I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of sales leaders have different definitions for what a good SQL is or a good MQL is, and that creates a bunch of nuance. And so we're not really speaking the same language. And so transitioning and changing the way that we're thinking about things to think about like sales qualified opportunities and then using a demand gen type of function to really power that is kind of like the way that's kind of making both teams happy. And so it's no longer, picking apart these massive list of MQLs that you've generated and, you've created this great content and everyone's excited about it, but sales are just not getting results from that. And instead, it's like partnering directly with that sales leader, that sales team, building out those experiences, building out that, buyer journey from point A all the way to point Z, and making sure that like you think about everything. So like, the small touches, the little personal details, like, the company initiatives, like if you're going after a specific, vertical or something like that, like what is their priority? What is their initiative? And less about talking about your personal brand or your product. Like, yes, that's important. But I think the critical piece to this and something that's very important is like understanding what they need, understanding the buyer. A lot of this comes from sales, but I think demand gen has a critical function in being able to help that in creating opportunities for sales to get this information. So I do think there's a change happening. People are tired of static lead lists, form bills, things like that are going out of the window. We're focusing now on like customer marketing. And so like, what does that look like? Are we doing webinars? Are we doing, local dinners where we bring people into the room with a thought leader? Like really getting personalized and making these experiences about them learning and growing so that they, they understand your product and the value. And that way they're more open to adopting it down the line. So it's kind of my thoughts around that.
That's awesome. And, I think even, and we'll keep going, but I think one thing that I'm hearing from a lot of B2B marketing leaders, again, like as the world's gotten smaller through digital and you have so much more access to different sources of leads, again, the game is no longer about hunting just, like you're saying, Bianca, just raw numbers of leads, right? There's so much competition. Everyone's doing so much. There's just more marketing being done by B2B organizations that you really have to kind of be very focused on, like, what am I doing differently for my customers or potential customers that's different to what everyone else is doing. Otherwise, I'm just one of many. I can't even count how many. I'm sure we all do. Like, even webinars. Like, how many webinars I've been invited to, in the last few weeks. You have to really look at that and say, okay, it's not just about what we're doing, but also thinking about what everyone else is doing, and is what we're doing standing out amongst all of that noise? Because ultimately, they're only going to have so much time to deal with, potentially figuring out a new product or new vendor that they're going to try. Ryan, you want to go next? Same question, just sort of any initial thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's all about alignment of incentives. And what I mean by that is lead gen for me is a fundamental misalignment of incentives, right? Like where you see companies and marketing teams doing what they call lead gen, it really means that they're measured on a volume of leads. And, there's a world in which the marketing team has a goal of generating 100 leads. They do that, they throw it over to the sales team, and then the sales team wastes a bunch of time following up with 100 leads and they go nowhere. And that's the situation we see far too often, where marketing teams hit their goals and sales teams are left, in the dust, right? And so that misalignment of incentives is like, I think the casualty of or maybe the cause of lead gen. Demand gen done right is actually a strong alignment of incentives. That's where, like Bianca said, it's where marketing is responsible for like as low down the funnel as you can get. So maybe qualified opportunities is like the number that more and more B2B marketing teams are starting to get measured against. And if you create a whole bunch of leads and they don't turn into pipeline, that's now your problem, right? And so actually cultivating real demand is a lot harder. The bar is a lot higher because you need someone who's not just a good fit on paper, but they need to be interested in your product. They need to be in buying mode. They need to like be well aware enough to be low down the funnel. And so the bar is a lot higher. A lot of people don't want to do that. But once you can do that, and we'll talk about the tactics, I'm sure, you basically throws a lot of old school lead gen channels where you just get a whole bunch of uninterested leads. It throws them out the window. So it's a greater distance to hit your number. It's a lot harder. But the teams that are kind of practicing and functioning in that way, those are the teams where marketing and sales are well aligned.
Yeah, no, that's great. I find it interesting that kind of both you and Bianca, opened up with answering the question, in relation to the sales team, right? And I think that that's such a big variable that's different about B2B marketing than B2C marketing. Is there's usually this existence of this entire other half of the equation that you're meant to, we were talking about internally, like it's kind of this frenemy relationship, right? It's like you're always blaming each other. Hey, I need more leads or better quality leads, and then it's the leads are fine, you just need to close them, right? And there's always that tension. It's kind of like a forever battle. And I'll probably circle back to that because I do think it's something that at all levels of all sizes of companies, especially at startups, but it certainly exists at enterprise size companies, since the beginning of selling things. It's something that probably is underrated by less sophisticated organizations, just how big of a factor your sales and marketing dynamic and collaboration is into ultimately, generating but ultimately converting demand into revenue, right? And which is all we really kind of care about.
Yeah, I'll give maybe one example of this. Like my inbox is full of vendors who are like, pay $1 per lead, or sponsor our thing and get 500 leads guaranteed. And you know what happens when I pay for those? I'll give my 500 leads to my sales team and they'll say, thanks for wasting my time. And so anything that seems easy is I classify as lead gen. Anything that like actually gets your ICP interested in your product is hard by definition. And there's a journey you have to think about, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's demand gen. Anything that, so I kind of think of like lead gen as this like silver bullet that doesn't really exist. And
yeah, no, I like that. And Ryan, I'll let you kind of, I know we're delaying you a little bit here, but so Matt, sorry. But just anecdotally, at my first job, I remember it was a very large B2B and like, Fortune 100 B2B company. And our most effective campaign was a direct mail piece that was like giving away an iPod mini if you sent back the BRC and it became a lead, right? So lead gen. I remember thinking, I was like, is this a useful lead for us, right? Like, I mean, it's working well because everyone wants an iPod mini, like sure. But that seems to not be like the most qualified lead, which kind of, I think, Ryan, just to your point. But Matt, go ahead. What's your take on?
I went to a marketing conference, by the way, like 5 years ago, and they were literally handing out like, iPads if you just set up a meeting with somebody. And I think I walked away with like 4 or 5 iPads. And I don't believe I bought anything from those people. So I think that was lead gen. I think lead gen is a natural place to start when you're building a startup, because you're actually trying to harvest those like initial buyers that are typically easier to find in the beginning. You're building a product for like a very specific group of people, and maybe you can go work your way into that initial group through lead gen. I think there's a pretty quick transition to needing to become demand gen, where you like realize that you have to go develop your buyer. You have to Ryan said cultivate, like that to me is the big distinction, is that demand gen is all about developing, nurturing, creating the need state. You're not just harvesting kind of a need state that exists, which is why it's hard, right? So I believe there's also demand gen takes a lot of the pressure off of the top of the funnel. There's always that issue between, like you're talking about, sort of your top of funnel paid marketing people, your sort of lead generation, whatever, and then the rest of the team. Focusing on demand gen actually allows us to almost to have less pressure on finding the ideal perfect lead, perfect person, because it's more about, hey, let's define a good ICP, let's define a good group of individuals like that we're looking for. But it can be kind of broad, because when we bring them into our experience, our site, our process, that's when actually the real secret weapon, that the secret sauce, starts, which is developing that individual, teaching them guiding them, I think then you can look at all of the weapons that we have that are actually on our side of the business, not that are living in channels like Meta and wherever else, but it's how do we handle our onboarding? How do we handle our continuous kind of connection and outreach? How do we do email? How do we do, it's like all of a sudden the things that where the arbitrage exists are actually in our, we have the power over those things. So I think it's funny that this like lead gen versus demand gen conversation in some ways came out of the changes in how we're able to track our leads and our customers and like find the perfect individual. But it's almost like it was never that easy, right? Like it always should have been more on the side of the marketer or the salesperson or whoever it is to try to generate and develop. We just got a little lazy along the way because Facebook and other places started to tell us that they could find us the perfect person. And so I think it's a natural kind of place that we've come to within marketing. But yeah, I love to highlight that idea of like, we have to nurture people. It actually allows us to expand our addressable market. And so if you're interested in building a big business, demand gen is the only thing to do, because we have to grow that addressable market, and we grow it by developing it and investing in it, not just harvesting who's sort of already there.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually really, really interesting. I think you guys all brought it up, but two big pieces that are huge variables in B2B marketing is one, again, the presence of the sales team as a variable, and then also, the onset of digital marketing and internet marketing and the increase in speed and data responsiveness. Again, not to be the old guy, in a room, but again, when I first started out in direct marketing, which became digital marketing, we're sending B2B mail pieces that we had to wait like 18 months to 2 years to look at the results, because we're like, well, we'll see whether or not they renew their truck contract in 2 years time. I'm like, all right, well, like, let's do something else in between, right? And if you kind of like realize how much that cycle has changed, and we've now got so much more data in between, I sent you a piece of mail and I'm hoping you renew your enterprise contract for next year. We've got so much action in between there, content, data, a million things, right? More B2B companies are getting into advertising. Advertising on Instagram wasn't a thing for B2B companies a while ago. They wouldn't be on TikTok a while ago. It's all flipping very quickly. I think a lot of that is kind of what's changing that playbook. I don't even know if there is a real playbook anymore. But kind of going around the room and just quickly for everyone in attendance, if you have questions, just ask them in the chat. Lauren said it. But if you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. We'll get them answered. Just put them in any time. So what, we kind of talked a little bit about just the premise of the topic, but I think, one thing that everyone's going to be really interested in is how, right? And so we'll love to kind of start with, going around and kind of just hearing, like, what kinds of tactics are you categorizing as lead gen? What are you leaning on? What seems to be working? What are you seeing, working elsewhere? We'll love to kind of hear from everyone. Just as specific as you can be. What are you bringing to your companies? What are you thinking about? So maybe Bianca, you want to start?
Yeah, no, I think specifically here at Humanly, we're moving away from, oh, this is a cool title at a cool company in a cool place, let's get them on the phone. Instead, it's like, okay, what can our product do really well right now? And like, how does that align with people that can actually be a potential buyer? And so with that type of framework of thinking, it's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't have the intent data. We didn't have the technology that we have now. And so it's like my sales team in theory can get on a Zoom info. They can get on a Apollo. They can find these MQLs by theory that they don't need me to do that. So it's like they have access to that data. Instead, it's like taking that data, taking those segmented users that are actually, meaningful, and then putting them into like really targeted programs. What does that mean? So that could mean like we combine an entire type of journey, which includes, 2 in-person events, 1 webinar, 1 piece of content. Maybe we do put out a direct mailer, something like that comes in at the very end of that buying cycle. But just like partnering with them to build that program out at scale, and then making sure that it's resonating. And so like asking people if they're getting value out of the things that we're pushing them, If we're inviting them to an event, it's more than just getting them to a dinner and, having drinks and, just, networking and just having general conversations. It's really about bringing them on this journey with us. And so buyers want to feel like they're a part of the build. They want to feel like their feedback and what they're having to say is being taken into account as you're building the product. And so we're we're big on really making sure that's a feeling that they're getting. So we want to make sure that like they feel like they're in the garage with us as we're building these new products. They feel like they're in an innovation lab. Like it's a cohesive journey and they get excited about it. They feel like they're not being sold to. They feel like, they're adding value and they're almost like working with us and not, for us, or we're not selling to them. And so we've seen that go over pretty well and recently. Another cool thing that we've done, is like think about like demo comic books. So for us specifically, we're in conversational AI. And so instead of cold emailing and saying, hey, hop on a call with us, let's send them a comic book. And we're going to be the superhero in that comic book. And so we're going to walk them through this journey of like what this conversational and AI recruiting love story. And so it's like, how can you make this, very, very interactive, tell a story, get them excited. And then, you start that conversation, but just being creative, taking a step back, thinking outside of the box and just like pulling the levers that we didn't used to have, but now have access to. So that's how I adjust that.
Oh, is that something you guys actually did? The
Yeah. I've got the conversational AI recruiting love story. It's pretty cool. It's like anime style, and so it's like we're the superhero. We've got a customer testimonial dumped in there, so it's like the customer is kind of like their own character. Super interactive, and it goes over well. It's like it's not a case study. Case studies are great. They provide a lot of value, but people are tired of them. They're too standard. They're too templated. And people want something that's interactive that makes them excited. Like a case study is not anything that's like making someone just like, wow, maybe for like a data company or something like that. But for other types of buyers, it's too packaged and it's not, tied to the brand.
I think especially if it's Humanly is a pretty, a very, it's a very unique product, right? It's not like you're replacing their other conversational AI tool usually, right? It's a new thing that a company is trying. Having a piece of creative is a great angle. And actually, it's one thing that I think is really interesting about just like B2B in general. Like the creative. Ryan, I know we're going to get to it with you and some of the stuff you guys are doing at Udemy too, but I feel like the creative has gone really stale these days. And I think there's also something, I've worked B2C as well. Like because the internet made it so easy to just get cheap impressions, I think sort of the desire to create something really good on the creative side has been replaced by the desire to do a lot of things very fast and just like pump out a bunch of stuff. Because we're blasting ads, we're doing all this, we can post on social media and LinkedIn, we can send emails to a data, but we can do all these things now. There's a much lower bar for actually like, hey, are we trying to create a piece of great creative that's going to cut through, make an impact, tie it back to the business? And again, for I think especially for those of us who work at startups, is that if you go to B2B marketing before, it was dominated by still creative, right? You're still thinking, okay, again, I've got one mail piece that I'm going to send. My whole budget's going to be into this one piece for the first 6 months of the year. It better be really, really good and strategic, because like that's it. I don't get to do 25 versions in the next 2 weeks. I get to do one. And that's the whole thing. And so I think to what Matt was saying, part of the internet has also brought people really far back from that, where it kind of feels like it's really easy. So let's just try stuff. But I think that's one of the things that a lot of B2B companies on the demand gen front, really should be doing a lot better is improving their creative and really like taking the time to think about like what, not just messaging, but genuinely creative. Like what can we do to cut through, make a real connection and then bring them into the journey. So I think that's great. Bianca, and then Matt, I'm going to jump to Ryan first, just because Matt, you're in order of mine. But Ryan, I think it kind of connects well to what you guys are doing at Udemy. If you want to talk a little bit about what your strategy behind some of this.
I'll share my framework for just how I think about demand gen broadly that has worked for me at every company I've been at. I basically break out my number. I always start with the numbers. So you start with like how much pipeline or revenue do you need to generate, and like that, based on your conversion rates, you could back that into like how many meetings do you need to generate for your sales team, right? Like that's the simplest unit of measure that you can actually start kind of working towards on a weekly and monthly basis. So I understand to generate X in pipeline, I need, Y number of meetings, and I can actually back into that to understand how many of those do you need to drive on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis. And then when I think about generating meetings, I think about that in terms of 4 channels: inbound, outbound, paid, and events. I'm gonna put a pin in inbound for a second, because I think that is the hardest one, and that takes a lot of creativity that we talked about. So I'll talk about that in a second. But outbound, paid, and events is actually a really straightforward framework for deciding how much do you invest and on what channels and what works best. Outbound is the most straightforward. It is a function of people. You can be more efficient with technology and tools and things like that. But at some point, you hire one BDR, you equip them with the technology and the copy and the messaging, and you effectively have like a really amazing fast learning loop to get out messaging and see how it resonates with the market. And eventually you get to numbers that are repeatable on a weekly and monthly basis, and then you scale the team, and that sort of scales linearly as you build out kind of an outbound team. So that's one source of pipeline and demand gen. The next one, paid. Paid is really important not to actually oversaturate like the laws of physics in paid, because basically paid is, you can break it out into paid search, which is people are looking for you, and paid social, paid display, which is they're not looking for you, but you're going to like get in front of them. Paid search has severe laws of physics in that there is a certain number of people searching for you, and you want to like capture them, but you don't want to bid for keywords that are irrelevant and waste a whole bunch of money. And then the paid social and all of that actually just has limits from an audience perspective, right? Like you don't want to actually go beyond the people who are not in your core ICP. So that one kind of does have a gas pedal effect based on how much you optimize and how much you iterate on that. But again, fairly a pretty straightforward channel. And then events. Events is actually really simple. I always aim to break even from an events perspective in that you know how much you're willing to pay per lead or per opportunity. Actually, I'd like to optimize around the opportunity cost. So if I'm willing to spend $1,000 per opportunity, given my ACV and my conversion rates, and an event cost me $50,000 to sponsor, I want to at least break even from the event side and generate 50 opportunities. And therefore, beyond that, there's brand halo, like there's all the things you can't measure, but from an ROI perspective, you want to break even. So I always take pipeline goal and I divide it roughly based on historicals and laws of physics between those 4 channels. And I didn't talk about inbound yet because I think this is the one that is the most black box to everybody. How do you actually drive qualified inbound leads? For us, it's a function of 2 things. It is how much website traffic are you driving, and then how are you converting that website traffic? And for every week, we have an inbound lead goal, and I break that down into what's our website traffic goal and what's our conversion rate goal. On the conversion rate side, we use our own product. We use Mutiny to actually run a bunch of experiments to keep the conversion rate static, because as you increase traffic, conversion rate naturally goes down. So our goal is actually to keep that flat week over week and then increase traffic. And for the traffic increases, that's where we have every quarter we come up with what is the content we want to create, what are the experiences we want to create. We get really creative. This quarter, we're creating a game based on the show Survivor. Survivor spelled with AI, so it's an AI-focused challenge that we want to get a whole bunch of celebrities involved, like really putting on our B2C hat to get mass exposure here. But that is to hit a very ambitious website traffic goal. And so I have one person focused on like creative, website traffic, content, all that stuff. And then I have one person focused on how do we maintain the conversion rate with all that traffic increasing. So all in all is like, you can break down the number into these like 4 channels, or at least that's how I think about it. 3 of them are pretty straightforward and mechanical, and I think that's where most marketing teams operate. And then there's this inbound bucket that like feels like a black box, but it actually doesn't have to be if you can kind of decompose it into the raw elements of website traffic. That's where you want to apply your creative hat, and conversion, that's where you want to apply your experimentation hat.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna clip that nicely, Ryan, and expose your entire framework to all of LinkedIn. So I appreciate you detailing that. Matt, I mean, anything specific to
Yeah,
that? Um,
that was good. That was like the super hyper practical stuff, and maybe I'll speak to a little more of the like theoretical um areas. My my background, interestingly, is like more in B2C, and I think there's this blurring now of like the tactical stuff between sort of like B2C and B2B, because all it kind of condenses down to the exact same thing, which is like if you can develop a relationship with your potential customers, then you can do so much with that, and it doesn't matter what you're selling, or whether that's, you know, skincare or apparel or enterprise software. I think that still holds true. And so the comparison that I'll share and how I think about developing that customer actually comes from my experience at Havenly, which we were building um, essentially a pipeline of trying to expose people to this idea that interior design is something that they should consider, right? So we're a higher AOV type experience, so more similar to B2B, in a market that didn't actually have the didn't necessitate the service that we were selling yet. So we were having to convince people that online interior design was something that was a better experience than just walking into a furniture store. And so some of the things that we did, and I hope that these will sound very intriguing, because they should be for B2B just as much as they were in this business, were things like a high friction funnel. So actually trying to make the funnel heavier friction, which would be controversial in direct consumer or B2C. We did that specifically to develop that individual, right? We assumed that people were landing on our site because maybe they came through an ad or heard about us and there was some sort of interest, but that didn't mean they were here to convert. They weren't sold yet on what we were doing. So how do we develop them? So creating friction specifically to expose them to things that we think are important for them to learn before we drop them onto some sort of conversion page, right? Very transferable in B2B. Getting rid of time to purchase as a metric. Like so many B2C businesses, they're all about, hey, like this week or this month we're focused on trying to shrink or condense down the time to convert so that we can have more ROI on our paid channels. I think that has a direct negative impact oftentimes on businesses, because if you're trying to push people through, then you're doing the antithesis of nurturing, right? You're just trying to harvest. So I think that's another thing, like removing that as a metric, focusing more on earlier metrics, like are we are we engaging with people in a different way? Are people joining certain lists, or are they signing up for things like webinars or whatever it might be? Giving away value. So we actually designed a part of our site to be more of this like Pinterest style, come learn, we're gonna give away these layouts and designs and things that you can come and see. Well, giving away value is one of the best nurture things, right? I'm going to come to you before you, rather than showing you what I have, I'm going to give things to you. Developing community, like incredibly important. Like again, if we have a relationship with potential customers, then like we can do sort of whatever we want with that, but an actual real community around something that we care about. It doesn't need to be directly related or perfectly related to what we're selling, but something where that maybe ICP can sit in that group. And then the other two are leading the expert conversation. So I've seen so many good businesses being built on the back of, like, rather than having to go out and find influencers to promote and support what they're doing, they develop that strength internally, right? So using content, of course, is like maybe the mechanism for that, but how do you actually become the thought leader in the space and provide that content in like in a way that's really intentional, that doesn't feel like you're just pushing it out there to gloat about how great your product or service is, but actually telling people interesting things, like maybe like this webinar, like hopefully showing people that providing value in some way. And then the last one that I was thinking about was this idea of just like organic exposure. Like we want people to learn about us, not necessarily just through that paid channel, but we want to put sort of our nodes out into the market as much as possible from an organic perspective, because then when we go talk to somebody and they've seen us, they've heard about us, they've seen that content, like how can we develop? So I think all of those coming together are things that develop an audience and nurture an audience. Nothing I just said involves like actually, harvesting. But if you do all of that, then people are going to want to buy the thing that you have because of that relationship that you built with them.
No, I think it's right. I mean, and I mean, I definitely prescribe similar to Matt. The B2C and B2B worlds are converging. I think again that's kind of a societal thing. We're all being shoved into the same spaces, using the same tools. There was a time where everyone had to carry an iPhone and a BlackBerry, and then an iPhone was fine. I mean, I don't know why that springs to my mind, but just sort of this business and personal world kind of converging, and you're kind of using everything, and within the same spaces. We at Marketer Hire have seen a lot of success with B2C Playbook, which was still a little bit unusual, but we're seeing a lot more folks on the B2B side, sort of beginning to move into influencer and even dabbling with social channels that they wouldn't have otherwise. One thing I wanted to kind of get into next, and by the way, if you guys have questions for each other, feel free to jump in. But we covered I have a million questions. We covered a good amount of just kind of some of the ways in which you guys are thinking about demand gen and executing with your teams. Curious, like how do you think about resourcing and whether it's teams, software, what do you need around you? Who do you need? What do you need? Do you think, to be able to execute well when it comes to, demand gen strategies? I mean, we know content's a huge piece of it. There's AI, there's generative AI now as well. I'm sure we're all thinking and experimenting with that. If you haven't already figured out some tactics already, but kind of curious, when you think about what a company might need. I mean, I think you're all like growth stage. I don't know, everyone defines it differently, but how do you think about your team? How do you think about resources? How do you think about what does a company need to make sure they have in place in order to have an effective demand gen strategy? Bianca, we can start with you.
Sorry about that. I think the most critical component is a really good storyteller. And so you can have someone that's really strong with generative AI and that knows how to prompt really well and things like that. But if you're prompting and you're not telling a cohesive story with what you're generating, it's not going to make sense. And so I think the most critical component, the first person that you need to have is that storyteller. So maybe that's a content hire, a brand director, someone that's really managing that narrative. And then they have the ability to kind of bring in all the other resources to create that story and bring it to life. And so what does that look like? If you're a lean startup in your early stage and, maybe you can't bring that in-house, you use super targeted agencies. And I would say I know a lot of people go straight to Upwork and they'll find, a good freelancer who has a skill set. I would focus more on agencies who understand exactly your product, your market, and what you're aiming to do. And yes, maybe some of them won't be the best fit, or maybe they'll have, huge prices, but there's so many out there that there's bound to be someone that can really help you and think of creative ways to tell that story. So now that you've got the narrative, you've got that in place, you've got that in your hand. Okay, what does it look like to get that and amplify it to all of your not your users, but your prospects? Are you going to, do some type of series where you do office hours weekly and you bring in product and you bring in sales and you kind of make this a cohesive type of experience? I think all that comes from that storyteller. Outside of that, of course, to Ryan's point, performance marketing, growth marketing, PPC, SEM, those are still very important for demand gen. And so you're going to want to have someone that can kind of own that as well. That's not so much of the content side, it's more on the targeting side, making sure that you know what metrics matter the most. How can you reach that metric the most effectively, the quickest? That's someone that you're going to want to have no matter what. So it's once you've got that content validated, it's creative, you've got all these different things that you can use to tell this new story that you came up with. Now you've got to have that driver that can power it, to power the engine to distribute that story that you just created. And so that's kind of how I think about those first few hires. Down the line, you get a little bit more creative and bring in someone like experiential marketing. And so within experiential marketing, that's someone who would focus purely on creating experiences for your buyers. So maybe that's events, maybe that's dinners or something like that. But it's they focus on how can we make this person excited about something really specific, and how can we make that the only thing that we think about? So an experiential marketer, they're not thinking too much about content. They're not thinking about performance metrics. They're not thinking about sales or leads or anything like that. their core focus is just creating the best experience for your buyer. And I think that's kind of like the unique titles and roles that will play into a great demand gen strategy.
Awesome. And there is one more place, Bianca, that people should go to find the right marketing hire, but I won't say which place it is.
Yeah, I mean, I found my best marketer hire on LinkedIn. That is not a shameless plug. I paid the $20K buyout fee. It was the best decision I ever made. And yeah, definitely, that's a true story. This is not an endorsement.
I was like, say it, Bianca, say it. No, Ryan, how about you? Yeah, teams, tools, whatever you want. Like, what do you need in, what do you need on your team to kind of do this well, you think? You're on mute as well.
Just following in Bianca's footsteps. Actually, so it's funny. I advise a number of early stage startups, and the questions founders always have is like, who should my first marketing hire be? Like, should it be the storyteller, product marketing persona, or should it be the growth persona? And I always ask, like, what is your goal? Because in many cases, they've hired a head of sales, and the head of sales is expecting pipeline from them. And you could hire the world's greatest storyteller, and you could have a great story, but that person's never actually like held a number, and there's always like that disconnect. On the flip side, if you hire someone super tactical who's like, I know how to run paid, but I don't know what to say on paid, that's no good either. So I really do think you need a bit of a balance in the early days of like someone. I think the first hire should be someone who can actually like intuitively know the story, but isn't afraid to hold a number and is able to take a number and break it down into its piece parts and optimize and iterate and is super scrappy. From there, I would say like the profile of every hire I always bring on is someone who is a marketer, but actually it has kind of like a salesy DNA in that they can almost like own a quota. And the reason I do that is because like I said, I break down my number into its channels and infinitely break it down so everyone feels like an owner of some portion of the number, right? So, I have someone who owns the outbound number. I have someone who owns the paid number. I have someone who owns the events number. And then on inbound, it's a combination of like creative content people. It's a conversion rate person who owns that piece of it. But everyone has a target, and everyone knows kind of like what programs they have to influence that target. So you can scale into that. You don't need like a big team all at once. It's about figuring out the channels that work for you, and it's about kind of staffing those accordingly. But I like early on everyone to feel accountability and ownership over some portion of the number, so it's just not all on the CMO.
No, I like that. And then we have a couple minutes left here, and we'll do Matt. But just quickly, I think I joked with you guys before we got started here about a different topic of sort of growth as this concept within marketing, and this and I always bristle at it because maybe because I came from direct marketing where we were always having to kind of hold a number like you said, Ryan, right? I wasn't doing brand marketing and doing cool things. I was doing very boring data work. Well, I thought it was interesting, but most people thought it was boring data work. But I think it's just a topic for a different webinar. But when you get into demand gen, you really are from a B2B perspective. I think you really are playing in that classic. I mean, both of you guys said it. That sort of art and science cliche around marketing. You're kind of pulling back from Matt was saying it, but we've all said it. Like the last few years of being this intense run of like, oh my God, like look at all of the data we have, look at all the channels we have, look at all the ways that we can get contact information, look at all, like it was just this like fever pitch of being able to get access to so many people, that a lot of that kind of fell away. And I think the rise of demand gen has been about, okay, you know what, like we still have to do like the marketing part of this. We're still here ultimately to communicate about a product or service that someone may want and may not realize they want. And we're trying to convince them first, let them know that we exist, and then convince them that they should spend money on it. And that's really it. And so I think the storytelling component you guys talked about, and then sort of the growth work, I think for us, it's been interesting if you think back to the last 20 years, just like the pendulum swinging back and forth. It feels like it is swinging that way. back to sort of creative is king, content's king, especially with AI coming, where it's so much easier to produce so much now. It's just going to be, you're going to have to really elevate the quality. It's not just going to be about production. But Matt, just quickly, and then we'll see if we have questions. I mean, you're going in right now to help, stand up teams, right? So like, what do you think about first, really?
Well, I think that an important thing here is that good marketing strategy to me is an evolving story, not just a math problem, right? Like it's about figuring out how to piece together the elements of a story to figure out where you should be going and why you should be going there. One of the things I do with a lot of the companies I work with is this idea of like a growth manifesto or a marketing manifesto, where you're saying, let's on a 1-page document or a 2-page document, not a spreadsheet, let's write out how we view marketing. What are we trying to do, right? Like, who are we trying to connect with? How do we want to connect with them? Like, and it's not about channels. It's not about Facebook and LinkedIn and all these things, but it has you have to think more strategically about that. And I wrote about this on my LinkedIn. You can go back and find. I literally put an example of like a marketing manifesto in there, but like start with that story, and that story will evolve over time. But that's where you need to sit, is within that story. Like you'll get in the spreadsheet, you'll do the numbers, you'll do the math like long term, but like it's also about the story, right? My son is a little upset in the background here, so apologies about that. But let's get back to the story, right? Let's not just live in the equation. So I think that will dictate who you hire, how you build your funnel, how you develop these things. And so I think that's an important thing to think about.
Yep, for sure. Okay, well, I think we're coming up on time. Laura, I don't know if there are any questions you want to jump into. All right, here we go. If we are a lean, so question from the crowd, if we are a lean startup and cannot make content at scale yet, what's the best way to approach SEO and content? Do you have other suggestions on cheap growth strategy? I mean, I think a question for every early stage startup probably confronts this, right? I mean, if you're trying to do demand gen, you need content. Content costs money. So what do you do? So I'll maybe do a quick fire around the room. Bianca, what's
invest early on in a really strong template, whether that be for a landing page or a blog post. Have someone run really, really well, and then it's easier for you to duplicate that and then use it for different use cases. And so like, don't worry about having to create content or building something for everything that your product, services, or offers. Like that's too much. You have to move fast. Get that one template done really well, and then you should have someone internally, even if they're on a different team, that can take that and just like kind of like amplify it. So that'd be my short answer.
Awesome. Ryan?
My quick tactic that works in the early stages for this is actually to host topical roundtables on the things that your ICP is interested in. You should bring a perspective, but you actually let the crowd do the work for you and bring their perspective, and then you turn that into content. And like magically, that is actually what people are interested in. That's what people search for. So it takes a light amount of research, but you actually let like the crowd source the content, and then that kind of fuels your content roadmap in the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say stay really focused, right? Like start with that most that tightest network of who you're going after, and try to speak to them in the most native way possible for you, right? Like figure out, I think it feels like you need to be everywhere. You need to develop content. You need to go get all these SEO wins, things like that. I think just trying to focus on what you have to say, and what you feel like you have a voice for, and what your customers is also looking for. What's the Venn diagram? What's the overlap between the two of those? And go do that. And I think also just be careful with SEO, because SEO is such a long-term play that it's important to invest in, but start to invest in that after you've gotten a little bit of momentum, right? Because doing that up front, like you may never see the light of day to like see those wins, because you don't survive long enough. So I think flex into SEO long term, and focus on sort of more of the shorter term wins up front.
Yep. And I'll add in, I think one thing for marketing too early on, depending on how mature your team is, people often, especially if you're lean, you'll kind of conflate multiple tactics into one thing, right? So like good content marketing, like SEO is maybe a component of that, right? But it's not necessarily. You could be producing content for reasons that have nothing to do with SEO. So I think I would unbundle that and get as specific and narrow as you can to say, okay, what am I actually trying to achieve? What do I actually need to achieve it? And that will bring your cost basis down because you'll have less things, right? But if you're just like content and SEO are all one big thing, like you're basically just saying marketing, and that's that's going to be way too much. So second question, what indicators have you used in an early stage startup to decide it's time to make the transition from a lead gen strategy to a demand gen strategy?
Complaints from the sales team. So, hey, like lead quality is terrible. Like this is like people aren't getting on the phone with us. There's a drop off, open rates are not where we want them to be. And like, if you keep hearing that and you pivot and you change your strategy and it's just not delivering results, that there's something wrong. You've got to take a step back into the operating room and kind of unpack what you really need to do next. And so I'd say that.
When you feel the need to fire the paid agency that you hired because you think that they're not doing everything that they should be doing, which may I don't know if that's true or not, but actually I think the problem is that it's become too hard to just harvest leads into that are going to convert, meaning that you now have like reached a bit of a ceiling on like on those early adopters or those people that are specifically looking for the solution that you're selling. So I think like when conversion rates start to dive, when your CPAs start to rise, I mean, when you start to see the early indications of that, then I think you're probably needing to move pretty quickly beyond harvesting in that lead gen world into the demand gen.
Yeah, I agree with both of that. And I think in short, if it feels like marketing is winning and sales is not, that disconnect is a good signal that lead gen needs to shift to demand gen.
I'm going to do one of these where we have marketing and sales on the same webinar, and we're gonna have it out about who's right. No, I think it's right, and I think the classic thing too, just to kind of think about for me, I mean, I have to do a lot of advising for startups. I think startups early stage startups will jump right into performance, and they're almost never ready for that, right? The product is early, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think it's this opportunity. You kind of have to do it to make it work. You have the question I would always ask, founders about it. I was like, look, it's really simple. Like marketing is just about amplifying a message cost effectively. What you have to figure out, first of all, is, who is this for and why is it a no-brainer? And if you can just tell me that across the table, I can go market that message. If you can't tell me who it's for and why it's a no-brainer for me, you're probably going to have trouble, right? And because you can't really explain it, it's sort of theoretical. And so, when it comes to demand gen, again, keep it simple. It's about generating demand, right? You're trying to make someone want your product. Lead generation is sort of a bottom funnel. Hey, okay, a lead in and of itself is good quality. It's just sort of like flipping a mindset. So, I agree with what you guys said, but I think if you're early stage, keep it real simple. Your product probably isn't that good, and and your message probably not that good. And I would do a lot of in-person conversations and kind of hold yourself to the fire of, am I really making someone that someone wants? And then marketing is just, can I communicate it? And if yes and yes, then you're kind of halfway there. Third question, and I think definitely one for Bianca, because I think you're doing a lot of these right now. For a company that's fully remote, what do you recommend? Or I guess the opposite. What do you recommend to replace in-person events, webinars, gated downloads? Is there anything else that we recommend for demand gen in place of in-person events? I'm currently in the process of planning and don't want to overdo webinars.
You can get super creative. So I think the pandemic helped us a ton here, like with just giving us new platforms and things like that for remote collaboration, even like presentation tools and event hosting software. Something that I did that was pretty cool, not necessarily here at Humanly, but at a prior company called Make School. We were a computer science college based in San Francisco. Right at the start of the pandemic, everything shut down. Everyone was terrified because so much of our inbound and like our actually closing new students came from giving these like in-person tours around San Francisco and like bringing them to the campus, letting them see the dorms, et cetera. What we ended up doing was shipping everyone like an Oculus VR headset, and then we recreated the campus in VR. And then we had like an open house and an open night where they could all come. We sent them gift cards and things like that so they could have food. And it was almost like they were getting a tour of the campus, from wherever they are. And so that took us kind of taking a step back as a team and like brainstorming, like, hey, like an Oculus at that time, like an Oculus Go was only like $99. Like, what's that, that cost per close, like, just doing all the numbers and making that make sense. And then it was a no-brainer. And then like the experience itself was so creative and unique that, press mentions and things like, journalists reached out to us and said like, what made you do this? And then you get attention there. And so I think like, if you're fully remote, there's so many platforms like Gather, where you can go around and host little, networking things. And there's also a lot of like team building tools that have like cool, like wine tasting experiences or like cooking classes that you can do via Zoom. And so maybe you get thematic there. So you'll say like, hey, we're going to host this cooking class on Zoom. This is what we're going to aim to do, just get really creative. But yeah, I think the pandemic has helped us here a ton in terms of like gated downloads and content. Let me see, reading the question. Webinars gated. That's obvious. Yeah, no, those are good starts. I think also for remote teams, like you're decentralized from the rest of your team. So making sure that like your sales team is also speaking the same message that you are. And so sometimes like having like a checklist of like, hey, like when we have an upcoming release, like this is how we're going to reword things. And this is what we expect from sales. And then like even going in for some of that stuff together, like as a cohesive JTM motion, not just marketing led or sales led, like bringing that together and then enabling the sales team to do some of this stuff themselves. So like getting them the right material, turning them into marketers, you're working for the same goal. And so like when you get creative and start thinking about it in that way, that's when you really start to see some wins.
Awesome. I'm gonna move through some of the questions and like just assign someone to answer it, just so we kind of stay on time. I want to get our excellent panelists back to their day job on time. But quickly, Bianca, I think we got to bring you back for a creativity in B2B webinar, because you're giving away Oculus, you're doing comic books. I know. Sounds awesome. I hope to someday be a target customer for you, so I can get some cool free stuff.
We have fun.
Question 4. So probably that one. I'm gonna skip. What's in it for me to skip the demand gen? How many leads will get me? How soon? Hard to answer. I think Lauren, maybe if we can get contact information and some more company information, we can answer that one. I think it's kind of tricky to answer. Question 5. Is collecting an email address so you can stay in touch with an ideal customer a bad idea because it's harvesting? No, it's not. Depends on what you do with it. Don't do anything illegal. I'm just gonna jump ahead, guys, so we can move through. Question 6. I laughed when this one came in while Bianca was talking, because I actually make the founders I advise, as I mentioned, answer this question. How do we know if our product is bad or our marketing is bad? I actually do want us to answer that one. We've all worked with startups with varying degrees of product market fit. I wrote a pretty viral blog post back in the day about the second half of that equation tends to get ignored as I bang the drum for marketing. Kind of curious, maybe Ryan, start with you, and then Matt. I guess how do you think about it? How do you know if your product is bad or your marketing is bad?
I think I would probably decompose it into the two sides of the funnel, right? So it's like, if you can get someone interested in your product, then your marketing is good. If once they see the product, they're not buying, then there's something kind of broken down in the second half of the equation. If you're seeing churn, or if you're sort of like the latter half of the sales process, the customer side, those are probably like the fair signals. But if you're putting a message out there that's not resonating, chances are either something's wrong with the marketing, the messaging, the market you're reaching. Maybe you're solving a problem that doesn't need solving. So I'd probably like put it in one of those two buckets.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's a fact, like product is so often a factor of retention and sort of are in usage, and but I think getting things into people's hands really quickly and understanding the desire for that, like that's a product, that's a sniff test for product. I think marketing is have you designed a process to actually lead someone into that and expose them to that, And if you have a great product and you're not able to do all of that and build that and design that experience for them, then I think that is much more of a marketing problem. I would advise to figure out the product question probably before the marketing question as soon as possible. Because if you have a great product, like you could even have kind of a bad marketing process and it's probably going to be okay. So probably figure that one out first.
Yeah, if the product is great, the marketing is easy. That's how it's going to be. I mean, I think that's a pretty firm rule. You know, and like I said, if you make it a no-brainer, especially if it's a startup, it should be a no-brainer. If you can't really think of how to present it as a no-brainer, you probably have some issues. And you know, plenty of no-brainer things do well, but you're going to need a lot more money behind it. That's going to be kind of brute force. Cool. Number 7. Oh, we're at 2, but I think we can wrap these up really quickly. Maybe someone can answer if they want to. How do you determine the optimal program components in order? Oh, okay. Yeah. The order of the email, the nurture sequence, right? Do your email first, then direct mail, gifting, et cetera, I think Bianca, you mentioned it. I'll maybe let you answer. I think you kind of laid out that that's a big part of what you guys are doing to figure out in what order and what steps, and maybe we do an event here. Like, what does that loop look like for you, right? I mean, I don't know how long your sales cycle is, but you know, are you able to have that be a real thing that's figured out through testing, or are you having to make, you know, judgment calls or strategic judgment calls and kind of just go with it?
Yeah, there's a really cool platform called They Do. I just started using it this year that helps you attach metrics to every single part of the buying journey. And it's really cool because like what we've done here is like, okay, so I took the first stab at like the first maybe 6 stages, and then I looped in CS, and then I looped in sales, and then I looped in product, so that everyone had like they all put their input of like what touch points we should be sending where and why. It's a really intuitive platform. Like I'm not a testimonial as well, but like it helps you kind of just like put that framework together and kind of think about things. There's special, you know, spaces for certain landing pages, events, webinars, like all of those type of content already built into the platform. So then you can kind of use them strategically and then attach them to those metrics that you really need to get to your sales team. So I think that's a huge help.
Awesome. I just checked it out. I hadn't heard of this. They have very classic sort of Gen Z branding. I like that. Like, that's good. That's good.
Everything these days, like everything.
Yeah, nice great color gradients. Some serif fonts. No, that's awesome. Cool. Question 8, shifting from lead gen to demand gen. I think we covered that a lot. So I think, you know, a little bit earlier in the part in the webinar, you know, we kind of covered that. I want to let our guests get out here on time. So I mean, thanks guys for joining. Whether you're a guest or one of our panelists, this is awesome. If you have additional questions, if you email them in, we'll try and get Bianca, Matt, and Ryan to answer them async. And then all this content will be made available to everybody in various channels. So if you're on one of our lists, you know, you'll get it. Otherwise, if you want it, you can email in and ask us. But this was great. Wish we had more time, as always. But we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you. Bye.